Okay, I think that we are ready to get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Carrie Forbes. I am the University Librarian at Southern Oregon University, and I am also a member of the ACRL NSSE Information Literacy Module Review Task Force, which may be the longest task force name. I am a member of that task force that is hosting today's webinar. So today's webinar is what is NSSE and why does it matter? Just so we're on the same page, NSSE stands for the National Survey of Student Engagement. It is an annual survey of first year and senior students at participating four-year colleges and universities. As part of that survey, there is an additional module that focuses on information literacy. We have two presenters today who are going to tell you a little more about NSSE. Angie Miller will go first. She is an associate research scientist at Indiana University in Bloomington, part of the NSSE research team. And the work that she does includes research and data analysis, specifically focusing on development, data cleaning, and reporting for the items that are part of the NSSE. So she will start us off to let us know more about NSSE and how student engagement is measured. And then Nicole Branch, who is the Dean of the University Library at Santa Clara University. She will help you understand how libraries specifically can use NSSE in their assessment and in their advocacy for the work that libraries do. And then at the very end of the presentation, we will have an update on the ACRL Information Literacy Module Review Task Force, the work that the task force is doing, and then we should have plenty of time for Q&A at the end as well. And you can also, throughout the session, if you want to put your questions as they come up in the chat, and then we'll get to those at the very end when we have a break. So I am going to turn it over to Angie now, who is going to kick us off explaining NSSE.
Great, thank you. Okay, we can move into the first slide. So first I'm going to talk about some NSSE basics, and then I'm going to move into some more details about the module. So as Carrie said, it's the National Survey of Student Engagement, so NSSE, not the monster, the survey. So we look at first year and senior students and we ask them about their experiences, and these are experiences both in and out of the classroom. And this is because, we sort of realize that it's not just classroom experiences that contribute to one's overall educational experiences. So things are happening outside of the classroom, things are happening with the sort of services that they're receiving, the activities that they're engaged in, all kinds of other things that are contributing. So we try to ask about a real variety of their experiences. But we do want the items to represent good practices related to desirable college outcomes. So it's based on decades and decades of higher education research, looking at what things are going to be the most positive experiences for students. And so these are sort of their process measures of student learning and development. So asking about how often they've done things, asking about how much their institution emphasizes certain activities. So we survey every year. We administer data collection in the spring, but it really is for participating institutions, it's a year-long process. And every year we have around 500 schools all across the US and Canada who participate in NSSE. So next slide. So there's several different components of what we call the core NSSE survey. The big part of the core NSSE survey are these 10 engagement indicators. And so these are, we call them EIs, but they're scales, they're subscales. And they cover these different topics. So there's higher order learning, reflective and integrative learning, learning strategies, quantitative reasoning, collaborative learning, discussions with diverse others, student-faculty interaction, effective teaching practices, quality of interactions, and supportive environments. So moving on, I've got some examples of what items are under each of these categories to kind of give you a better idea of what we're talking about. So an item within higher order learning is examining or analyzing an idea, experience, or line of reasoning in depth by examining its parts. For reflective and integrative, we've got connected your learning to societal problems or issues. With learning strategies, identified key information from reading assignments. Quantitative reasoning, reach conclusions based on analysis of numerical information. And then sometimes we have parentheticals to add a little more description. With collaborative learning, so this is working with other students, explain course material to one or more students. And then the next set, so diverse others, had discussions with, and then people from races or ethnicities other than your own. Student-faculty interaction, talking about career plans with the faculty members, one example of that. For effective teaching practices, we ask about the extent to which their instructors clearly explain course goals and requirements. For quality of interactions, we ask about their interaction with several different types of people. So one would be like student services staff. And then for supportive environment, we ask how much does their institution emphasize a variety of different things. And an example of that would be provide support to help students succeed academically. So those are a lot of the types of items that we ask about on the core survey. And then we also ask about what we call high impact practices. And I've got those listed on the next slide. So these are things that are really valuable experiences for students. So things like learning communities, service learning, doing research with faculty, doing an internship, capstone projects like a senior culminating experience, like a senior thesis or a portfolio or recital. There's also study abroad, and then formal leadership, which some people debate whether that is counts as a high impact practice. So sometimes we count it, sometimes we don't, but we do ask about it because it's related to some important aspects of education as well. And then there's some other things on the core. So we do ask about things like reading and writing. So how much, we ask them to estimate the number of papers, reports, and other writing tasks of these sort of different lengths. Time on task. So we might ask them how much they're spending time in co-curricular activities. How much their institution contributed to what we call perceived gains. So things like thinking critically and analytically, so some sort of broad skills. We have some items about sense of belonging. That's an important part that's emerging in the higher education literature, that sense of belonging is important. And then we also have sort of demographic questions where they can tell us about their identities. So gender identity, racial identity, things like parent education, disability status, living situation. So a lot of demographic items that do contribute to the student experience as well. So then we've got, so to give you a summary, as I said, it's really kind of a year-long process for institutions that are participating in NSSE. So when institutions sign up to participate, part of that is that they give us the contact information for all of their first year and senior students. So they say, these are the people we want you to survey. And then we have a secure online portal where we do this sort of back and forth before the survey is administered, where schools can upload their materials, they're selecting their different ways they want to customize. And then also once we have their reports ready, that's where they go to download their reports. So we do send survey invitations via email. It's a completely online survey. Way back in the beginning, it used to be paper or online, and for the past 10 years, it's been online only. So we invite them to participate in the survey by sending them emails. And then we can send them up to 5 email contacts during the spring semester. And the point at which the schools decide on that, because they want to time it around things like when does spring break happen, or if they're on trimesters, when do those breaks occur. Institutions can also add topical modules or consortium items in addition to the core survey. And then each institution also gets to select up to 3 comparison groups to be included in their reports. So that's one of the real things that we think is special about participating in NSSE, is that not only do we give you reports that have responses from your own students, but you get to compare your students' responses to other groups of schools that you feel are similar to you. So perhaps that's based on Carnegie classification, perhaps that's based on other schools in your region or other schools in your athletic conference. So we let people customize who they're comparing themselves to within their reports, which we think is really valuable information to have that they wouldn't have, schools wouldn't have if they just surveyed their own students on their own. Okay, next slide. So the timeline. So in summer, registration opens. So our registration for 2024 just opened a few weeks ago. And so schools, make decisions about whether they're going to participate. And then when they register, they also have some more decisions to make about customizing the survey. And this includes the module and consortium selection. This is also the time when they're providing us their population files, and we tell us if there's any additional information we need, and we help them develop their recruitment materials. So what are we going to put in those emails? Are there any other ways they're going to recruit students? Then in the winter and the early spring, data collection happens. That usually starts at the very end of February and it goes through until May. And then the survey closes and institutions start deciding on the comparison groups for their reports. And then we spend all summer running the reports, and then late summer institutional reports are delivered. So the 2023 reports, we're just getting ready to deliver them on Friday, fingers crossed. So summer is quite busy for us because it involves a lot of data cleaning, a lot of report preparation. So that is the overall admin timeline, but as I mentioned several times, topical modules. So specifically, topical modules are things that institutions include at the end of the survey. So everybody gets the core survey and those items are all the same, but they can also add up to 2 modules. And these are short sets of questions on designated topics. And then we also have what we call consortium items. And these are schools that are similar in nature, that have decided on their own to all participate as a group, and then they write the items with our assistance. So it's similar to a topical module, but the schools are similar in groups. So for instance, we have like a Catholic consortium, and we have a Christian colleges and universities consortium. So those are sort of the slight difference between topical modules and consortium. So basically you can add up to 2 things at the end. So you can have 2 topical modules, you can have a consortium and a topical module, or you could just have one. And then everyone can add one topical module to the core at no cost, and then a second module, there's an additional fee for that. And then the menu of what modules are available rotates based on a couple of different things. It based on participation trends, it based on whether we think the module needs to be revised, and whether we're developing new modules that we think we want to swap out some of the older ones for. So our tentative menu for 2024 we're still making some final decisions on this, but this will give you an idea of the sort of the topics of the topical modules, the sort of areas that institutions are interested in getting a little bit more information from their students. So we've got academic advising, we've got career and workforce preparation, civic engagement, transferable skills, online learning, first-year experiences and senior transitions. That's when our first-year students get a different set of items from the seniors. High impact practice, the quality of those experiences. Inclusiveness and engagement with diversity, mental health and well-being, and then the reason we're all here today is reintroducing the information literacy module, which has been on a 3-year hiatus, and we're reintroducing that, and we're going to talk about that in more detail for you, sort of the process behind that. One thing I will talk about first before we get into the details specifically on information literacy is So on the next slide, I have sort of a sample report. So you might wonder, well, I'm talking about these reports. What do these reports look like? So we give all the schools a data file back with student level data, like all of the students' responses to all of the survey items, but we also present some reports. And so this is an example of a topical module report. So you can see that, so we list out the items, and this is just a screenshot of one. So we list out the items and the responses. And so you can see in the blue highlighted column, that would be the single institution's responses. And then in the column next to it, that's everyone, that's the comparison group. And then we also do means or the averages. And then we also do some statistical comparisons. So you can sort of see that even for the topical modules, which would have fewer number of schools participating than in the core survey, we still do like to provide comparison information so that you're not just getting your own students' responses. You can kind of get an idea of what other institutions who also administered that module, what their students are saying. Okay, and then so specifically the information literacy module. So it was introduced in 2014, and you can see that it was pretty popular at first, and then it kind of dropped down a little bit. I mean, these are still, if you look at the number of institutions who selected it, these are still pretty good numbers in terms of institutions and in terms of the responses we are getting and the ability to do really important research with their responses. But we did take it into hiatus in 2021. And that was based on the need to update for the relevance of the items, and then also to take an opportunity to align them with the ACRL standards. That it's been on hiatus. We've been revising those items, and then we had a draft that we felt comfortable running as an experimental item set in 2023. So just this past year, in the spring, we collected data for those, and that was to sort of do a test run for those items before they became a topical module. So I think that is what I have to say about the history. And yes, I think I'm going to turn it over to Nicole, who's going to talk a little bit more. Oh, sorry, the framework, not the standards. I'm thinking of the NACADA standards, which our advising module is aligned with. And then, okay, Nicole has reemerged. There she is.
Great. And I do see that there's some questions, but I think we'll hold those till the end. So feel free to keep adding questions. Okay, so I'll share more about the revised information literacy module that the task force has worked on. So part of the impetus, as Angie mentioned, behind this revision was to reflect the changed approach to information literacy that was represented with the development and adoption of the framework. And the move away from task and skill-based competencies to more complex critical skills emphasized in the 6 frames. You can do next slide. And to give you a sense of these revised items, these are some examples of the questions related to student engagement with and use of information. So in these examples, students are asked to reflect on their behavior in the past year on a scale of never, sometimes, often, and very often for items such as completing an assignment using an information source other than the required course readings, changed the focus of a paper or project based on information you found while researching the topic, evaluated an information source by conducting additional research, consulted an information source you found on social media for an assignment, and coached or mentored a classmate or peer with research for their course assignment. Other questions ask students to reflect on what they have done or plan to do before they graduate. So items such as attended a library session a session with the library about conducting research, i.e. a librarian visited during your class time, you set up a time to meet with a librarian outside of class, you attended a library workshop, etc. Or presented or publicly shared the results of your research, scholarly activities, or creative works to an audience beyond your classmates. So an on or off-campus conference, exhibition, or other venue. And then another set of questions asks students to reflect on their knowledge, skills, and personal development. So this includes things or items such as keeping an open mind when encountering opposing perspectives during your research, understanding that different majors or fields of study have different research and writing practices, and developing information and research management strategies, such as note-taking, using citation software, document organization, etc. So in addition to the information literacy module, core items in the NSSE survey may also be complementary and can provide useful data related to information literacy. So for example, the reflective and integrative engagement indicator items that ask about connecting learning to social issues may connect or be complementary. And then higher order learning items that have to do with analysis of ideas or experiences. Also items around selective support environment, such as those that focus on support to help students succeed academically, using learning support services and attending campus events. High impact practice items that address research and capstone assignments. And then there's a lot of natural overlaps with the reading and writing items, and also the selected perceived gains items. And those are items such as writing clearly and effectively, thinking critically and analytically, and being an informed and active citizen. So these can kind of extend the information literacy topics in the core items as well. So, and one of the questions touched on this a little bit, but some of the potential obstacles that the revision task force has grappled with. The one that was already mentioned is competition with other modules. So there are several other modules that can be selected, and we're aware of the ongoing need to highlight the importance of information literacy in light of competing campus priorities that might impact the selection of modules. And in light of this, we're considering revising the module name and description to reach a wider audience and reflect the broader scope of these revised items. And we would love feedback on that. So feel free to send it, or when we get to Q&A, if you have ideas, feel free to share. And we're also developing a webinar to support librarians in talking with campus decision makers about the module. So look out for that webinar, which will be in, I believe, October. Also in developing items, we sought a balance between asking about specific behaviors and not having questions that were too burdensome for recollection. And along the same lines in terms of language, the language must be applicable to multiple institutions. So there's no institution-specific programs, buildings, et cetera, included in the questions. We also sought to avoid jargon with an awareness that students may not use terms as the same terms as faculty or administrators. And then finally, as we all know, references to technology can become very quickly dated. And, the campus conversations around AI and higher ed is a really tangible example of that. Okay, so that's a bit about the items, the revised items, and I will now hand it over to Angie, who will share a bit more about potential uses of the module data.
Yes, thanks, Nicole. So yeah, so there's several potential uses of the module data, and some of it is sort of on a very specific level, and some of it is more on a broad level. So one important thing to keep in mind about having NSSE data is that the NSSE data, while we call it confidential, it is not anonymous. So when we give information, when we give the data back to the institutions, they have a student ID variable, meaning that they have the ability, we don't, but they have the ability to merge that back in with other data on their end. So because you know which student's responses are which, you can merge that in with registrar data. So you can, did they take a course that had a library component? Are they part of an honors college program? Did they participate in a learning community? So there's several variables like that you could look at in conjunction with your NSSE data. You could also look at things like card swipe data, or if you have learning management system data, or if your library tracks library use data. So did they use an interlibrary loan? Did they check out books? Did they do other requests? So anything that you have student level data for that is identifiable in some way, then you can also have the potential to merge that in with your NSSE data. Now, I do have highlighted here, it's important to make friends with the institutional research folks on your campus, because a lot of times these are the people who are going to be able to merge that data together for you. They're going to be the ones to make all of those links and the crosswalk between all of these different data files in order to have one big, very useful data file. So there's a couple of other things you can do, even if you haven't merged it in with other data on the back end. You can look at things like crosstabs or frequency distributions by high or low module items. So if someone's scoring really high on a certain item and other people are scoring really low, you can look at those in terms of gender identity or race, ethnicity, or major or first generation. And this can give you some really important information about your respondents, because it can tell you what types of students are using the services, what types of students are engaged in these best practices, and what types are reporting gains. So you can see, and if you see differences, perhaps first generation students are not using the services as effectively, then maybe you can develop some targeted programming to really make sure that everyone has access, everyone has an understanding, everyone knows what kind of services are available. So those are some important things to look at just within the data, the module data itself. And then you can also look at it in terms of relating it back to the course survey. So we highlighted how the information literacy complements a lot of these components of the course. So you can look at correlations between module items and other engagement indicators, or you could look at some regression models that include some of those control variables, things like gender, race, ethnicity, or GPA. Your ability to do this might really depend on your ends. It might depend on your analytic capacity, but you can sort of, there's a wide variety of, really technical inferential statistics that you might want to run, but you can also get a lot of important information just looking at the descriptive statistics, looking at those frequencies or those crosstabs. So don't let the idea that you can do more sophisticated statistical analyses scare you away. There's a lot of important information in the data, just as it is. So, and then I think Nicole's going to talk about some of the broader uses for the data, and these might be important for you as you're sort of fighting the fight to get the module real estate for having this as part of your NSSE administration.
Great, thanks, Angie. Yes, so broadly speaking, NSSE module data can be used in a number of ways depending on what your goals are. So first, the module data might help you make that case for support for more or continued resource allocation by highlighting strengths and gaps in students' knowledge or experience related to information literacy. Also, the aggregate data might be used to develop and address research questions. So if you or other stakeholders on campus are interested in research related to information literacy, this module could be an option. And then data and findings might be used to enhance awareness of information literacy and its importance for higher education and society. It's a continuing issue, as we all know, for our society. And then, as was shared earlier, the information literacy module complements other core items and may be used to make conceptual connections to other important topics, writing, engagement, research, support services, et cetera. And then finally, many institutions and accrediting agencies have information literacy as part of their core learning goals. So the information literacy module might be used to examine student learning related to institutional learning outcomes. And to give you a more concrete example of what the use of NSSE data might look like, I'll share an example from my institution, Santa Clara University. In 2016, when I served as the head of instruction and assessment for the university library, I was invited to be part of a grassroots cross-disciplinary group that wanted to address information literacy, writing, and critical thinking at our institution. And our team also included faculty and staff from English, political science, engineering, and the Office of Assessment. Our goal was to develop research-informed best practices to enhance teaching related to these areas. And we named this initiative the Success in Writing, Information, and Research Literacy, or SWIRL initiative. So next slide. So research informed was really an important component of this initiative. And in our first year, we were focused almost exclusively on research, and NSSE was a really important component of this for us. We administered both the writing and the information literacy modules in 2017. And in our analysis, we looked for statistically significant differences between the first year and graduating students. And this analysis for us indicated areas of curricular strength. So we found, for example, increased experience in writing about data between first-year students and graduating students, increased use of things like citation mining, and use of library resources. Also, very importantly to us, we identified areas for curricular improvement, including increasing opportunities for students to argue a position using evidence and research, the need for greater assignment transparency, and the need for greater scaffolding of information literacy and writing practices across disciplines and courses. So the NSSE data was particularly useful in providing data, and that served as kind of bookends to the SCU experience. And from that, we could draw some conclusions about our programming relating to writing and information literacy. So what did we do with the NSSE data? First, we combined the NSSE data with other data that we had gathered locally from surveys that we had developed and focus groups that we conducted, as well as other institutional data. And the NSSE data was both complementary to the other data that was collected, as well as adding additional data we would not have gotten from other sources. So in particular, those comparisons between first year and graduating students. And we use this data to create reports, presentations, and recommendations that we use to successfully advocate for a faculty development initiative. And we also incorporated this data to create compelling needs statements and to really help us educate and recruit faculty to participate. So this data Finally, this data also helped inform the creation of an assignment design tool. So some of the choices we made in terms of the products that we created were informed by the NSSE data as well. So the ultimate outcome of this was a multi-year initiative focused on information literacy and writing instruction. And through this, we led faculty learning communities and workshops. We also developed, as I mentioned, a signature assignment design tool that seeks to extend transparent assignment design to writing and information literacy. And this tool has an explicit emphasis on equity and critical thinking as well. So in addition to that, we're also continuing our research, now focusing on the impacts of the initiative and on assignment design and student learning. And yeah, so for Santa Clara and for the Swirl Initiative, NSSE was a really excellent data source to analyze the experience of students related to information literacy, to identify gaps in our curricular approaches, and to advocate for and design equity-based interventions. And I should note that we used the previous version of the module, but because our initiative did build on the ACRL framework and explicitly sought to address higher order and critical thinking skills within writing and information literacy, I really believe the revised module would give us even more rich and meaningful information than the prior version. All right, so that's an example to sort of give life to the use of NSSE data. And now I'm going to hand it over to Miranda.
Good afternoon, everyone. Forgive me, I seem to be having camera issues today, but I wanted to introduce you to Moya Kirker. Moya is our current fearless leader. She's the task force chair of the third iteration of this task force. She is also the lead for teaching and learning at George Mason University. And if I may, if you haven't already, she wrote an excellent article in Portal last year entitled, "Am I a Teacher Because I Teach? A Qualitative Study on Librarians' Perceptions of Their Roles as Teachers." So she's going to talk about the past, the current, and the future work of the task force. Thanks, Moya.
Thanks, Miranda. You made me blush. Yes, so I'm going to go over what we've done and what we plan to do in the next year. And I always say that the first 2 years were led by Miranda of this task force, and she got us to where we're at. So I'm forever grateful for her. Okay. So we were charged by ACRL in 2020 to work with NSSE staff to review and revise the current module and provide comment and analysis of the data by August 2021. So very broad charge. And within those 2 years, we did a significant amount of work, I think. So we spent a lot of time sort of talking about the NSSE, researching how it's been used by librarians, in particular the IL module. We looked at usage data, some of which Angie shared earlier. And then we used all of that background information to run a survey of libraries who ran the IL module from the 2014 to 2020 cycles. That was really informative about what folks used the data for, what they didn't. We learned that a lot of librarians never saw the data, for example. And then we used that survey to gather a smaller focus group of librarians who were involved either directly or sort of tangentially because of their roles with the NSSE administration on their campus. In conjunction with that, we had lots of conversations with relevant projects and organizations. So AAC&U was one. We talked with Gina from ACRL about Project Outcome. One of our task force members, Craig, wrote a really great white paper for us on student engagement and the intersection of information literacy that informed our work. And so throughout all this process, we were working with NSSE representatives, primarily with Angie, but before that, a gentleman named Kevin. And through all of that consultation and work, we drafted the revised questions that were, as you heard earlier, in an experimental set this past administration in 2023. So the task force was, I guess, recommissioned would be the word, retasked, recharged to continue the work because it was ongoing. And we really got started it was about halfway into this cycle. So our work is to finalize the revised revision of the module and then perform engagement and outreach to membership of ACRL and other relevant higher education groups. And so we have a list of tasks here, 2 that are associated with our charge, some of which we have completed already. So for example, number 3 on this list, we've I shouldn't say we, but Angie and Nessie have done some analysis on the pilot data for us. And we use that to make changes to the modules. So there was, I think it was something like 4 questions that we grappled with about overlap or distinguishing them, et cetera. And some of these are ongoing. So number 2 and 4, this is sort of an example of what we're doing right now. We're doing outreach, putting the word out that the module is back in business. And some of these other things we will tackle over the next year as well. So what are some of, well, forgot about this slide. And you can see I don't have a date for webinar 2 here. That is because we're finalizing the schedule. It is likely, almost certainly, to be the week of October 2nd. And hopefully we'll have that date this week finalized for you all. Okay, so what's next? Sort of those lingering task items. So we're going to continue doing outreach within ACRL and external organizations on the module. We will report the findings of both the pilot study and the full administration, hopefully in the spring, broadly speaking, at least to the ACRL community through publication, presentation, webinars, et cetera. And then that first item, which is to create education materials for librarians who are at institutions who use this. That has not been finalized, what those materials will specifically look like, but things that have been tossed around have been, okay, so like, how do you talk to your IR people about advocating for the module to be run? What do you do with the data once the module is run? How can you use it as an outreach tool, an assessment tool, an instruction tool, et cetera? So that's all in the work ahead. So before I kick it over to the full Q&A, I just want to say thank you to all of our presenters and members of the task force who put this together. But if you have questions, concerns, or feedback about the revision process, where it's at currently, please do not hesitate to send me an email. I'm happy to field any questions or take them back to the task force at large as needed. And then you'll see that this is, truly the work of a community. And over the years, there have been many versions of this group and people across ACRL who have helped us. And so please take a moment to thank all of the members in addition to our presenters today. And so with that, I will toss it over to Q&A.
So scrolling back up in the chat, I was trying to keep up with some of them, but others I have not answered yet. So the big question, there was the one question about limits to the topical modules and that sort of being like an issue for competition. So yes, we do limit it to, you can only have 2 things at the end of the survey. And that's because we really are concerned about survey fatigue. Once we get students, there's issues with response rates that many schools are concerned about, but that's getting students to like click on the link and take the survey. But once they're in there, we also are concerned about getting them to finish the survey. So if there's too many things at the end, we found that the drop-off rate just keeps growing and growing every time they get to a new page, with new module items. So that's why we have made the decision to cap it there. The median survey time, of course, it's difficult to know. We do track the duration, but they could have something open on their browser for like a day and just they could go to sleep or go make a sandwich. So we don't know how much time they're actually spending on the survey, but we do know that the more things at the end, the longer it is, the less likely they are to finish it. And so that's why we have the cap there. And then and part of that question I also think was that your institution might always do one particular consortium or one particular module in order to get the longitudinal data. And so then you would really have to, fight for that second one. Some schools will have certain if the certain group is interested in the certain module, they will, come up with the money, part of the money to pay for the administration. So it doesn't all just come out of one general assessment budget. They've also, some schools are very interested in rotating what modules they do, so they can really address all these different topics. So if you know that your school is participating in NSSE in 2024, or you're just interested when you participated in the past. So you can go on our website on the main page and you can look up your institution and you can see if you're participating. And if you send me an email and you say, I want to know who on my campus was in charge of our administration, who did all of those pop file uploads, who did all of the customization selections. If you send me an email, I will tell you whoever that person was at your institution during your last participation. I can't guarantee it'll be the same person because people switch roles and jobs, and if you're on a 3-year survey cycle, it might not be the same person, but I can at least tell you who it was and the office that they worked in. So that might help you have a direct contact with the person who is doing all of the actual back and forth with your part of your NSSE administration. Now that person isn't always the decision maker. Sometimes, it's a dean or it's, a supervisor in their office, but I can at least direct you to the person who is involved with your NSSE administration. And that would be the first step in sort of plugging for adding this module. And then, oh gosh, the chat's just really running away. There were some questions. Most schools do take advantage of the topical module, but particularly the first one since it is free. And then most do add the other one because it is in terms of the overall cost of the survey administration, adding another module is relatively low. More questions. Okay, that's Miranda put some really great resources about past research. Kevin is not with us anymore, but he was the champion for the information literacy set for a very long time, and he's done some really important scholarly work using the module data.
Angie, would it be helpful for me to read the questions for you?
Yes, it would. So
Okay.
I'm not scrolling and looking back and forth. And Nicole, if you have a good answer to any of these, please jump in as well.
Okay, so I'm going to go all the way back to the top. So this is a question from Donna, more conceptual, but why limit schools who have consortium questions to only one topical module? And there's commentary about, when you're in one of these consortium, fighting for that one module can be difficult.
Yeah, so that was sort of the, we don't want the survey to be too long. So we have put a cap on it to keep it from being a burden on students, and to make sure that we get a good number of them who actually finish the survey.
Right.
Okay.
So there's a question about the frequency of the topic modules, but I think that you answered that in the reply that followed. Well, I'll ask sort of a question related to this. Do you find that, or do you get the final decision about the topic modules, or do you have any of the institutions consult with you at NSSE about like which modules to run?
I mean, in terms of which ones they want to administer, whether it's better to like do the same one or whether to pick a new one. Usually they make that decision themselves. I don't, unless it was a question that was related to like, is this module not going to be offered in the future, or it was how this module received an update, how different is it from the original items, but usually they make their own decisions about which ones they want to administer.
Okay, thank you. So another question from Donna. I bet this is a social science research faux pas of a question, but here goes. Are there models and or ethical allowance for using or adapting with attribution or even compensation? NSSE questions locally, so not administered through NSSE.
Yeah. So we have a process for that. Item usage, there's an agreement that you fill out. If your institution has been a NSSE participant in the past, we totally have you fill out a form and can administer them yourselves. Yes, we have a process for that. I mean, you don't get the comparison group information, but yeah, you can totally use the items on your campus just as a local admin.
So this is a question for, I think, more so the task force. Do any of the information literacy questions get at sense of belonging aspects currently tracked in NSSE? And I'm trying to think. I don't think so, but if there's a task force member that can think of a question that might get at this, I think it just sort of thinking off the top of my head here, in that sort of attempt to avoid institution-specific language or anything, I think sense of belonging is difficult to get at in that sort of generalizable ability.
Yeah, and you could, I mean, there are some items I think that might correlate with the sense of belonging items from the core. Maybe people who say that they worked with a classmate on research for course assignments, that's one of the items, or people who felt like they received help from the library, that might contribute to their sense of belonging. So there are certain items on the new set that I think are correlated, but I don't know if I would say they were a direct sort of like the items themselves are directly assessing sense of belonging.
Yeah, that would be my thought as well. Great question from Diane here, one that we as a task force I know sort of discussed a bit at the beginning of the process. Do the modules, in particular this module, the IL one, are they available as part of the partner project CCSSE Community College Survey of Student Engagement?
Oh, SESE is actually based at UT Austin. That is not part of our, so we're at Indiana University Bloomington and they're at UT Austin. So I don't think they do topical modules because their administration model, I'm saying module too many times. Their administration model is that they still have a paper survey and they still go into classrooms for the captive audience. So they have really great response rates because they like go in there and they hand it out and like, students have nothing else to do. They're like, sure, I'll fill out your survey. Whereas we're trying to get them to reply to an email. But because of that it's paper, I don't think it's customizable with modules in the same way that NSSE is, although that's something that I would want to check with their project's website or their project's representatives to confirm.
And perhaps that could be something the task force can recommend at the end about investigating from an ACRL perspective as well. Great. So Carrie asks, is the off-year cycle an option for some topical modules? I'm trying to remember the context for that.
So meaning that if you administered the survey every year and you rotated the modules that you selected, or are you talking about the local administration of your own topical modules of the items, but you are in charge, your institution is in charge of the administration and you just fill out the permissions form?
Looks like Carrie dropped a link. I'm
Yes.
afraid to click on it because I'm sharing my screen.
Yes, so that's the local administration option. So there's, you can see there's also a link on that page to download the proposal form. So yes, we should, in information literacy, this new information literacy would be included in the options of what you can administer. I haven't looked at that form in a while. It might not be updated.
And that's the same thing you were talking about earlier. So the off cycle is local administration are the same option where you can run any of the options yourself.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and that's okay. So I just looked at that document and it does not have, oh, it does have information literacy. So yes, those items would be updated. Although honestly, if you wanted to use the old ones, if you had a reason for that, I don't see why we wouldn't let you use the old items. But we're promoting the new ones because we think they're a good update.
So Donna asked a follow-up question about the local administration of the questions. Does that come at a cost to the institution?
I think that it depends on how frequently or how recently you would have administered NSSE in the past. Like if you have never done NSSE before, then there would be a cost to licensing the items. But I'm not sure of the specific costs or the specific level of recency, but that would be a question for this CPR items email that I'm also going to put into the chat.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
so that is the email if you're interested in the local administration that is not part of a big full standard NSSE participation.
I think that I've asked all of the questions. It is very possible that I missed one, and please, if I did, just reiterate it if you don't mind, or but I went through a couple of times.
There was, so I would like to return briefly to the idea we talked about with changing the name to perhaps make it a little more enticing, especially because we've updated the items to, the items don't just get at things happening in libraries, they get at sort of a variety of things. So one of the proposed names we're thinking of is calling it information and research literacy, because it gets a lot at these sort of things you do while you're researching. Are you doing good practices as part of your research? So I wanted to know what people thought about that, if perhaps that would, information and research literacy would be a name that might entice more people on campus to see these items as important, or if there are other sort of names that you all would think might be capturing the updated items.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Krista has said in the chat here, which is exactly where my brain immediately went. It's like oftentimes, at least at my institution, when we talk about research with faculty, depending on what discipline they are, it has entirely different meanings. Like we jokingly call it small r and big R research. Like there's library research versus sort of science lab-based research. So that was so I share Krista's sort of immediate reaction here.
What are people's thoughts on the term, evaluating and using information effectively? Information research. Research-based inquiry was another term that came up when thinking about what are these items, what are some other things beyond information literacy that people are getting at. But then we was concerned about the jargon of research-based inquiry. Evaluating and using information effectively. I'm copying that one and putting it into a document.
And to clarify, Angie, the people who would see this name are just the administrators making the choice, right? Like students taking the survey.
Yeah, that's a very good clarification. Students don't see the name of the module when they get to the module. This would be for, the people who are making the NSSE customizations, who are deciding upon which modules to include. We were just wondering about if information literacy was too sort of associated with librarians, and they're like, oh, that's too niche. We don't want to, just just have a module just for that, whereas really the new items are not just about libraries. They're really about like using the library, but also in sort of this larger way of doing research and looking at information. Well, they would not, we're not offering the old items. There's a question in the chat from Anne about new versus new versus revised. Yeah, so it would say update, like it'll on the website, it'll have the name of it, whatever we decide on this name, and then it'll say updated for 2024. So they'll see that it's been updated. I don't know if they would be more likely to pick a new or revised.
So we're just about at time. So what I'm going to do is suggest, and I'll put it one more time in to send me an email for any attendees who have thoughts or suggestions that I can take back to the task force when we meet in August this month. It is August. Holy cow. To discuss and provide feedback to Angie and Nessie. So it's 3 o'clock, so I want to honor everyone's time. Thank you all so very much for attending and your thoughtfulness and questions. And thank you very much to Angie and Nicole, and then to Marinda, Carrie, and Lolly, who helped put this specific webinar together. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone. These are great questions, great feedback.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.